Welcome to the Etsy Conversations podcast, featuring inspiring interviews with Etsy shop owners, hosted by Ijama Elazu.
Hi, and welcome to the Etsy Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Ijama, and I thank you for joining me for another episode. And this week, my guest is Justin Page Wood, and Justin does so much stuff on Etsy and for Etsy and with Etsy. So we're just going to jump right into it. Justin, thank you so much for being my guest and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
You are most welcome. So before we get started, can you give us a little bit of background about you?
Let's see. I started, I think, on Etsy in 2010 or something. I had my friend kind of told me about it. And at the time, I was just starting my business, doing web design and graphic design. And I just was in the last year of my school of architecture. I was going to Cal Poly Pomona, but I wanted to just start my own business and get into it. And so I just wanted to put something up. So I just kind of threw together a painting and took a photograph of it and put it up on Etsy, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. So I think it took like 6 months before someone even bothered to, contact me about it. So I just kind of been, interested in just lots of different creative things. So I think Etsy's always been, fascinating to me because it allows kind of artistic people to do stuff online and actually get seen, as opposed to, trying out things like Amazon or eBay, where those are not really creative outlets in a sense. So my background's kind of all over the place, but I really love just design, art, and most of my stuff I do is actually just website design for other businesses. But it's hard to stay away from Etsy because there's so much, for me, so much opportunity to kind of be creative and get your stuff in front of millions of people.
Yeah, I agree. And for anyone who is feeling discouraged that your Etsy shop is new and you're not getting sales, Justin just said it took about 6 months, did you say, before anyone showed any interest?
Expressed any interest in. I only had, I think, like 3 or 4 paintings. And so, someone would say, I'm interested in it. And I was kind of trying to learn how to essentially sell and not just be, I think a lot of artists, especially when they're starting out, you want to be creative, but you don't really want to sell yourself. Mm-hmm. And I had that issue when, I've been playing piano since I was 5, and I always wanted to record my own piano album. It took me like 10 years to get the courage till I, put something together and find a recording studio and actually get the thing out the door. And then from there, you got to sell it. And as an artist, it's hard for an artist to kind of sell themselves and say, my stuff's awesome, you should buy it. And so I have to kind of go into like a business mode. Okay, like take what you've created and then look at it now from the perspective of selling it and kind of detach yourself from it. Because either with my paintings or my piano music, it's, if it's too personal for me, it's like scary to have other people listen to it or look at it because I don't want to hear negative feedback.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah. And usually, like, I've discovered, it took me years to figure this out, but I'm my worst critic. I'm like the most critical of my own work. And once I get it out there, people are usually really positive. Like someone out there is on Etsy or wherever else. I put like my piano album on Kickstarter, and I got like 50 people who I didn't know who they were, but they said, I love your piano music, and I wish you'd come out with more, and that kind of stuff. So once you get it out there, and there's going to be a few people who are negative, but for the most part, people are really positive. Yeah. And so it's just good to kind of just not criticize yourself as much as you think other people are going to, because the majority of the people in the world are not. They're not. I mean, you'll always get a few people who are negative and criticize you, but for the most part, there's a lot of people who will really encourage to see creativity.
Fantastic. So now we're in 2018. You're 8 years into this, and your wife, Melinda, also has a shop on Etsy. And between the two of you, you guys have made over 46,000 sales. So I'm going to do this a bit differently because I think to date, that's probably the most sales of any seller I'm talking to. But what I like is that now you're sharing information. You're talking about what you've learned from selling on Etsy and studying just how it works and what's working for you. So nowadays, you probably know that there's a lot of talk within the Etsy community about people not having the types of sales they were having before as far as numbers go. They're not getting as many sales, and things feel like they're slowing down for them. But you're doing something about it, and I think you have some insights to share about that. Let's start with, before we talk about the products that you've made to help other sellers get through or navigate through what's going on with Etsy right now. What do you tell people when they ask you or complain about not getting sales like they used to?
I think, I mean, I don't know the full answer because I know that, a lot of people say the Etsy algorithms have changed. And, now that Etsy's put some videos out, the CEO is explaining that they really have been doing those changes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's obvious that there are, especially 2017 was the most dramatic change that I've ever seen
Mm-hmm.
Etsy do since they
Yes.
started. And so there definitely are reasons to say that there is instability in the keyword searches and the way that things populate and how you get found. So there's definitely some stuff you have to kind of navigate and work around. But to me, the way to work around that is just to think of your Etsy shop as a brand new 2018 Etsy shop. Act as if you were, if you were to start over today and do a new Etsy shop, based on what's going on in the world right now, what would you create? And don't think of it as just fudging or, changing keywords and trying to get these little details worked out from 2017 or 2016 and try to carry through. You kind of have to think of it in a whole new way. Like, what do people want to buy today? What would you do differently if you could start from scratch and then look at keywords that are popular? And the way you do that is you just click on the Etsy search bar. So when you click on it, I'm doing that right now, so I'm not messing this up. But you can see what's popular now. Those aren't really reliable, but if you just type in like the letter A, and you can see right now I have Aquarius. I don't even know how to say the next word. Art, anniversary gifts. Those are the things that people are looking to today or in the last few weeks. And that's where I start. So I say, what would I do today if I made a brand new item? Then pair that with the keyword that Etsy's telling me is popular. So anniversary gifts, for instance, we've been doing a lot of stuff with that because it's trending, and I make new designs based off that idea.
Mm-hmm.
And just doing those two steps alone, and I think I talk about that in the books that I write. It's really about product design, creating things that people want to buy,
Mm-hmm.
and then using keywords to match that product. And if you're doing those two things in a way that you're thinking about it almost from scratch and not thinking of it as an extension from the past years you've been successful, but rethink about it today, I find that whenever I do that, I get sales really quickly. And I'm not thinking like with our digital download or printable art stuff. I'm like, okay, how can I make more printable art to just make more printable art? Because that kind of phase is dead a lot. I have to think, okay, what do I need to do today to extend our brands or think about it in a sustainable way for the long term.
So can that philosophy be applied to any niche? So if someone maybe maybe specializes in knitwear or crochet designs or woodworking, can they apply that without necessarily having to change their entire product line?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in some sense you will probably need to think, not like say you're doing woodworking and you're making tables. I really like minimalist, modern. If I go on Google and I look at the trends of what people are looking at, the minimalist category has been going up and I started in 2010. I branded my own web design stuff as minimalist, and it's gone up. So I know that if I continue working in that direction, I'm going to have opportunity. But let's say, as styles come and go. So like
Mm-hmm.
farmhouse or vintage is really popular in a niche category. Let's say you do woodworking. And if I did modernist woodworking, I would be wise to do the same exact thing, woodworking, like making tables, but
Yeah.
then making another version, like a vintage or farmhouse version or something like that, where my skill set doesn't have to expand, but I'm just tweaking the keywords and maybe a little bit of my method to get new customers coming in. Because if you're just focusing on one little niche only, so I see a lot of Etsy shops are like they only do, I don't know, one very specific thing, and
Mhm.
you're going to hit that market, but what you're going to oversaturate yourself in sense that you're only going to hit so many customers. Actually, that's what Melinda told me a few years ago when I did printable art. It was doing really well, and I was like, this is going to go on forever. And she's
Mhm.
like, and one eventually you're going to hit everyone on Etsy, and you're going to hit the ceiling. And
Yeah.
that's what we did. We hit a ceiling, and it's never gone beyond a certain point. So I think you have to find your skill set, but you have to, as an artist, continue to find other art venues. You can't just like stay in one spot, especially with art, because things change so fast. People like look at fashion. Companies like H&M and Zara do really well because they're constantly churning out new designs.
Yeah.
And the companies that are doing poorly are the ones that they keep selling the same thing since the 50s, and they've seen their sales go down if they don't
Yes.
reinvent and you know address what's going on in the world today. And I think even on Etsy, even though you're small and you're in a niche category, you have to do the same thing if you want to keep your sales going up.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you say is if your craft is crochet, don't stop crocheting and say, okay, I'm going to move over to macrame, but figure out what is changing. What do people want today that perhaps they weren't looking for last year? Or what were you selling 4 years ago that people no longer want today because it's just not relevant today as it was 4 years ago?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a good example because Melinda did for a while woven wall hangings, tapestries, that thing. I
Yeah.
think like 2 years ago, and it was super popular. I think it was 2016, and she actually got approached by Nordstrom and a couple other big brands because they knew that this was a big trend at the time, and we couldn't
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to scale to make. They wanted as many units as they could possibly get on
Mm-hmm.
hand. Um, and I didn't know how to manufacture, like mass produce these things, and I researched. I didn't know who to call, so we dropped that. But at the time, it was really popular, and we probably could have done it well that year. But if we built a whole business around that and try to scale it today, you'll see it in we'll see it in Crate and Barrel and those kinds of shops. They have a wall hanging section, but
Yeah.
at least on Etsy, that I can see the searches are, the trend has gone away. If you kept doing that forever, you can't build a sustainable income off of something that's that trendy. And that's why I think, especially when you're your own person, like if you're a huge company and like for Crate and Barrel, for instance, they've got everything. They've got furniture and cups and all that stuff, and they can learn to stay in the market because they can move into categories that are trending. And so they're a big company. You can adjust. If you're an Etsy and you're doing one thing and
Mm-hmm.
the market changes and you're doing that one thing, you will get crushed because no one's going to want the thing that you were making 2 years ago, especially in the art category, because art is like the most, you know, like even with music, if you look at the 90s and, the different music that came out, you
Yeah.
don't make, unless it's like a revival or like like a fusion of music, you don't keep making the same kind of music forever. You have
Yeah.
to change
You have to change.
constantly in the art, at least in the art world. And that's what Etsy is mostly is art. It's not Amazon. We're selling toilet paper and it's
Yeah.
not, like no one's coming out with a new like digital version of that. Like they can, but you can't compete with that either. You can't compete with these big companies that do, mass produced things either. So you have to pivot constantly if you're on Etsy. And I think that's why a big reason, other than the algorithm changes, is the fact that art is so fickle. It changes all the time, and you have to change your business to match that.
So speaking about changing your business, you offer you offer different courses for Etsy sellers at different phases. And so, like there's an introductory guide that you have for people who are just starting out on Etsy. But then you also have something for more advanced sellers. Can you talk a bit more about what you offer in those and who exactly will benefit from the different resources that you provide? And for you that is listening to this, I only mentioned two, but Justin and Melinda actually have multiple Etsy seller books. I will link to each of them or that whole section in Melinda Wood Designs Etsy shop, so you can check them all out. But Justin, who would you, well, let's go with that question.
Oh, which ones are good for which people?
Yeah.
So I set it up so it's kind of like from starting from 0 sales up to about 1,000. So I feel like once you've hit either 500 or 1,000 sales, you kind of know everything you need to know in order to do well on Etsy. And at that point, you could start scaling in terms of making either multiple Etsy shops or going into multiple categories, not just like you said, like just doing crochet only. At some point, like you hit 1,000 or 2,000 sales, you need to start thinking about what's the next phase. I like to think of it as like a startup phase. You're always starting up a new phase. And I always like, my favorite part is the startup phase, because when I come up with a new idea, I'll start a new Etsy shop or something. And that's the most exciting because you're trying to figure out the business model. But if you're going to stay within one shop, you want to kind of think of the next step as a new startup in your business.
Okay.
So the model I have right now is Etsy Intro, which is you're just thinking about it. Here's some things you need to think about when you're starting your Etsy shop. You have 0 sales or you haven't even opened it. And then from there, it's kind of I kind of base it off of how many sales you have. So Etsy Essentials is getting you to your first 200 sales. And once you hit that, Etsy Advanced is for once you're trying to get to your next 500 sales. And that's more when you're really trying to dial in your business model in terms of thinking about seasonal trends, like the difference between what to sell in winter and summer, and those kind of like bigger things. So you can work your way to a sustainable model.
Okay.
And then after it's the advanced, I've got one for promoted listings. So I like, once you've figured out what actually sells, you can promote them with Etsy promoted listings. Before that, you don't really want to use it because you're trying to figure out what sells in the first place. So if you're promoting things that don't sell, Etsy ads are not going to be worth the time and money for it.
Okay, that
and
makes
then
sense.
From there, Etsy Experts is the last thing, and that's when you've got 500 to 1,000 sales. You've figured out your business model, and you want to essentially think about, okay, how am I going to scale my business to a real business where I can actually make income on a regular basis? And my goal is always to kind of hopefully get onto Etsy full time. I've never actually gotten there because sometimes Etsy does good and sometimes my web design business does good. Right now I'm in the web design business is doing too good. I haven't even looked at my Etsy shop in the last month because web design is doing so good. But to get people to that point, so about 40% of our income is supplemented from Etsy.
Okay.
And so I want, my hope is that everyone who goes through that process of reading those books will get to the point where a substantial amount of their income is coming from their Etsy shop.
Okay. And are these books more geared towards sellers of handmade products, or will those who sell vintage and supply items also benefit from the information?
Yeah, so the concepts work well for both types. Right now, I lean towards physical products as being a more sustainable long-term thing. The digital download stuff just has long-term problems of copyright issue and people taking your stuff. We've had a problem where I know where I hit the limit where I go to several shops and I see our artwork being sold there.
Really?
They bought it
Right
from our
on Etsy?
shop. What?
Right on Etsy?
Well, yeah, that too. People have taken our stuff and sold them on the Etsy shop. I lost track once I saw like 50 different shops selling our stuff. I just stopped counting because it's just too easy for people to take your digital download stuff and resell it. But I saw also there's a shop here in Waco, Texas, that they bought some of our artwork and they're reselling it in their store without our permission. And I was just like, this is like, I'm like working for other people in a sense. I'm not really building a brand. And so the strategies in terms of keywords, are organizing your shop, doing the right kind of branding, figuring out what kind of products to sell. Those are all relevant to digital download and physical items. And I've never done a physical Etsy book specifically, because a lot of that's like, how should you get your packaging and how should you ship it out, and
Mm-hmm.
managing your time about like sourcing the materials and going through the process of creating it or the concept design. And I really love that part. To me, that's the most fun, but it's not really I don't see how I could write a book about like how to be creative in the sense of, that creative process. I think a lot of people need to know that kind of information. I
Yeah.
haven't spent the time yet to kind of sit down and explain to people how to do that, because a lot of it is like, it took me years to get to the point of I made a painting, but then, to ship it and track it and all that stuff, to me is still not as fun as creating things. So it's
Mm.
hard as an artist, like you get to that point. Sorry, I guess I'm rambling.
No, no, that's fine. So I have a question though about the promoted listings. So
Uh-huh.
you did say that not until, or rather, you don't recommend it until a seller has made. What do you think is a good cutoff number? I don't recall what you said.
Oh, right around 500, I would say. Um,
Okay.
because you want to know what sells consistently. Like you want to know, okay, here are my three best sellers
Okay.
out of this 500 sales. Because there's a lot of shops that have like 200 items, but I know from analytics I can see what's selling, and usually there's like 3 to 5 that do really well consistently.
Okay.
And you won't know that until you get a lot of sales. You won't know what works. So if you're promoting stuff right at the beginning, you have 2 sales, you
Mm-hmm.
don't know what's going to be worth your time. You're just going to be blowing a bunch of money
Okay.
on things that don't sell.
So what I'm gathering from what you're saying is promoted listings are better used to make more sales of what's already selling, as opposed to just throwing everything out there and hoping somebody wants something that you're promoting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. What do you think about the new Google, well, not new, but relatively, Google Shopping? Is it called Google Shopping?
Yeah.
Google Ads that Etsy now offers as an additional marketing strategy.
Yeah, that one scared me. I tried that one time and I forgot I even turned it on. I looked back and I had spent $300 on ads and no sales.
Whoa.
And because you can't control the cost per click and how much it's shown. And so I said, I'm not going to even go there. That was crazy. I know that Google Shopping is the right thing, but again, especially if you don't like, I tried that with the black and white paintings that I do now,
Mm-hmm.
and they're higher price point. Like the average order is about $150 per sale,
Mm-hmm.
and but I even just showed my two best sellers on there, and that's still like just $20 a day for
Wow.
advertising. So it's not optimized, in my opinion, very well. It's not optimized. I
Okay.
don't recommend it for anyone, but on my own experience, I'm sure some people have found a way to make it successful, but I honestly have no clue how to
Okay.
use that tool.
And that's yeah, that's different from, I was going to say, oh, that's different from Facebook ads. Of course it's different from Facebook ads.
Yeah, because that's more. I think that Google Shopping ads can be more, what do you call it, optimized in terms of targeting the right people. Like Facebook, you can target their interest and their
Mm-hmm.
gender and age and all that. And I just don't think that through Etsy you can target that.
Yeah.
Not since I last checked, and
Yeah. I
that's
don't think Etsy
the
gathers
part.
that much information about who's on there.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things I also like that you're doing, I feel like you're doing so much. Justin and I were talking before we started recording, and and he's doing just many different things, and I like that because as creative entrepreneurs, I'm sure most people listening to this can relate to that. We have just multiple passions and do different things. And one of the things that I know you're involved in is teaching people how to have a homemade business, and really, or maybe not just but basically run their business or businesses from home, and how to be successful about that. Do you want to talk just a little bit about what you offer with that, and who's an ideal candidate for that?
Um, I mean, I don't do anything specific. I know a lot of the. I mean, are you referring to like the critiques and that kind of thing?
The home business startup class.
Oh yeah, yeah. So that one, I mean, that one's hard. I've tried. You know, I love helping people out who want to start their own business from home,
Mm-hmm.
and I think in the beginning there's so much to learn. Um, you know that you have to like in terms of a lifestyle change. I especially the ones that really get to me are there's a lot of like single moms on Etsy who are trying to supplement their income. I've heard one lady said that she has 3 kids at home and she's a single mom and she's got to make pay the bills.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the kind of people I really if especially for my own family I want the same kind of thing for us as well. And that I mean that class in particular is not I would not actually recommend that one at this point because
Okay.
what I found is a lot of people on Etsy really want to make Etsy work,
Yeah.
and that course is really designed to kind of move away from Etsy and start a website, offer services and do other things other than
Okay.
just being on Etsy. I would say, when you're in that space, because talking to people from Etsy, all the feedback I get is everyone wants to stay on Etsy and figure out how to make that work. And so my personal emphasis has not been so much on that particular course, just because um, it's hard for people to kind of switch between the two. I think you got to either start doing services. So like I do web design. In the past, I've done photography for clients, either for family photography or commercial. And
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're on Etsy, I think it's just hard for people to kind of learn both at the same time. I think it's a
Okay.
little overwhelming. So I would just say probably for most people on this listening to this might not benefit from that
Okay.
unless they felt like they were ready to kind of move over. And
Okay.
if people want to write me about, I'm totally like I love to give advice for that kind of
Yeah.
stuff anyway. So if you want to write me, however, like an email or something, I'll definitely get back to you about that because there's a lot I think that people can benefit from it. But I don't want to distract people and say build a website and build an Etsy shop
Yeah.
and do everything because people will get burnt out. I think, especially
Okay.
when things started.
Good. I like that. That's being very realistic, and I appreciate that. Can I ask before I let you go? So, as you know, there's a lot of talk because things have changed on Etsy quite a bit. And you just mentioned that most people who are on Etsy want to stay there and try and make it work. In your opinion, do you think it's worth putting in the work to try and make Etsy work?
I mean, yeah, I mean for myself for sure. Like I'm not gonna leave. I mean, I don't think I'll ever leave Etsy as long as it's
Okay.
available because it's the place where people go to buy creative stuff that you can't get anywhere else. And I
Yeah.
think if you think about it when you're going on Etsy and you're trying to figure out what to sell, you gotta if you think about it in that way, like people are buying this because they cannot get this on Amazon, they
Anywhere
can't
else.
get it on
Yeah.
eBay, they can't get it in a store. If they did, they'd have to travel to some a creative artsy place that
Yeah.
only has a retail shop or something. Like Etsy's kind of like the retail shop for the internet,
Yeah.
and even more so like sustainability wise, you see all these like Walmart and other companies closing down shops because people are buying stuff online. I think that Etsy is still the place to be. It's just that you need to start thinking about it, especially if you've been on it for a while, as a new business model. How can you do 2018 in a new way that you've never done it before? And
Yeah.
so a lot of other Etsy shops, like especially J&M Home, where we do custom artwork and handmade furniture. That one's doing really, really well, and because we're thinking about it in a brand new way.
Mm.
And so I think it's a mistake to move away from Etsy if you're frustrated with it, and I
Mm.
think there's a ton of opportunity. And I think that you know if you want to be creative and you want to be selling on the internet and not open a retail store, I don't think you have an option but to sell on Etsy, at least for now.
I like that. That's very definitive. And for anyone who wants to hear more about um, how to be successful and make Etsy work, Justin has a podcast. It's called Etsy Essentials Podcast. And Justin, how can people find your podcast?
I don't know if it shows up on Apple iTunes because I haven't figured that out actually. If you go to melindawooddesigns.com or do a Google search for Melinda Wood Designs, or it's also on our Etsy page. But there's a section in our blog. If you go way to the bottom, there's a category for podcast,
Yes.
and so it'll just show all the podcasts. But that's where the blog is. There's a free newsletter. I try to write like every week or so on new topics, and then keep up with that. But I don't think if you go into iTunes, the last time I tried it, it did not pop up. So I'm not sure if you can find it that way.
Okay, I'll help you with that offline. But in the meantime, I will link to, I'll put a link so you can get to the Etsy Essentials podcast and melindawooddesigns.com and Justin and Melinda's Etsy shop. So you can go check out what they're doing. One of the things I like about what you share is that it's not always the same things we hear within the Etsy community or other people who talk about Etsy. And so it's a refreshing perspective.
I don't pay attention to what everyone else is doing, so I don't really know what's going on. I mean, it helps me. You know, I mean, it's good and bad. I need to learn from other people too, but I try not to, especially be competitive and think about, you know, what other people do and how can I compete with them. I like to, you know, in a sense.
Yeah, I hear you.
Not, you know, compare it, you know.
Now, you did mention if anyone wants to get in touch with you, you'd be open to responding. What are the best ways people can reach you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, I'm just double checking that right now because I think there should be a contact section on melindawooddesigns.com. That would probably be the best way. If you scroll to the bottom, there's a little link for contact. That would be the best way, just a little, you know, send your an email on your message. That way I don't miss it. I'll know it's related to the podcast because I got all my other emails. I get work emails. So I probably might miss it that way. Okay.
So I will have a link directly to the website and so people can use that contact.
Cool.
And one last thing, what parting advice would you have for anyone listening right now that's planning out their 2018?
I think that from the sense I get from talking to people is that there's kind of a fear of, you know, trying to make it work and scrambling to get everything together. I got a lot of people, I've heard people be like, I work on my Etsy shop 8 hours a day. And I'm like, I mean, you can't do that. You can't make a living on Etsy on the day one. You know, you got to plan out the year in a sense of like, hey, what's the most important thing I need to do today? And get that done and move on with your life in other areas because I don't think you can like just work on 8 hours a day and be wildly successful. At least for me, because I was learning so much. I couldn't, if I did that, I'd get burnt out. I had to do other things to make money. So I would say just plan your day in a sense of what are the 1 or 2 most important things I need to do today and get those done only. And, you know, move on with your life, with your friends or family or your daytime job and that sort of thing and plan out, you know, not necessarily the whole year, but maybe the next month or 2, you know, here's where I want to be and here's what I'm going to do today to get there.
I like that. And I'm finding that has worked for me too, is I know what the big picture is, but then it was so overwhelming, always thinking about the big picture. And then each day I picked one thing. Even having 3 things to do got too much. And so one thing that I want to make sure before I go to sleep, I'd at least cross that off. That would get me, you know, closer to, you know, painting the big picture. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. And I really appreciate being able, I love to share. I feel bad for myself because some of the stuff I don't want to give away necessarily because it, you know, our Etsy shop might have lower sales because we have more competition, but I love seeing other people do the things that they love to do. It's kind of addictive for me to help other people. So I'm grateful that you were having me on today, and I hope some of this has been at least a little bit helpful for other people.
I'm sure it has, and thank you for being on. And I thank you for listening to the podcast. I will be back next week.
Thank you for listening. You can subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, and while you're there, please leave a review too. Visit convome.com to leave a comment or feedback on this episode.